Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1952 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Shirley Booth won for her performance in Come Back, Little Sheba. But why did she beat fellow nominees Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, Julie Harris, and Susan Hayward? We'll explore all this and more today on And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 25th year of Best Actress at the Oscars. I guess you could say it's a landmark year, 25, which covered the films of 1952. And we'll be discussing why Shirley Booth won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today is one of my favorite people to talk about actresses with. He's a culture writer and critic, film programmer at Newfest. He's been on the show a number of times in the past, most recently on an episode of On Second Thought about Funny Girl. Please welcome back to the show, Murtada Elfadl.
Kevin, hello. I'm so excited to be back on your podcast and to talk to you again. And when you said 1952, I got really excited because the first thing that came into my mind is Joan and Bette. And I'm like, wow, I get to talk about both Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. How lucky am I?
I know. You're the lucky one who gets to talk about the only time that the two of them were nominated together at the Oscars. Of course, we will eventually be talking about 1962, but in a very different type of context than having both of them nominated. So yeah, very excited to have you on the main show again. It's been a while.
Yeah, this is my debut on Best Actress. I'm so excited.
It is very exciting. So, well, before we talk about this year, let's talk about this Best Actress as a category. So, first question for you, Murtada. What is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
I mean, I have an answer, an obvious one. I mean, everybody who knows me knows my favorite actor is Cate Blanchett. So, yes. Of course, Cate Blanchett in Blue Jasmine when she won in 2013. That's my favorite win of all time. But also, I think before Cate won, my favorite winner has always been Vivien Leigh in A Streetcar Named Desire. And it's so funny that then Cate, my favorite actor, win for kind of playing Blanche Dubois. So now we have this twin winners as my two favorite, Cate and Vivien Leigh. Yeah. So those are my two.
Yeah, definitely feels like two sides of the same coin, and one of old Hollywood, one of this era. Yeah, I love that. It's very twinning there. So a very Murtada answer. But
so let me ask you the same question, and I don't know if you've divulged it in. I haven't listened to all the Best Actress episodes, but I've listened to a lot actually. And I don't think I heard you say who your favorite Best Actress winner is in the ones I heard anyway. Did you divulge that, or is that a secret?
Well, I suppose that's something that I would reveal at the end of this journey.
Yeah, it's too early. It's only 20. You're only 25 in.
Right. I'm only 25. Come on.
Yeah.
We have to wait till we get to the 90s before I really have a concrete answer. But as of now, my answer would probably be Vivien Leigh and Gone with the Wind, actually.
Interesting.
Yes. But Vivien Leigh in A Streetcar Named Desire is top 5. We literally just talked about this on the previous episode. So really one of those performers that manages to knock it out of the park twice and is very deserving of both of their Oscars. So
yeah, absolutely. She is. And it's funny that she's only been nominated those 2 times, and both like one of the best, both I think in the top 10% of winners of all time.
100%. Yep, absolutely. So my other question for you, what would you say is your most heartbreaking loss in Best Actress. I'm curious if it's also Cate Blanchett.
Well, you know what? For a very long time, I had a grudge against Gwyneth Paltrow because she won
Sure.
Shakespeare in Love undeservedly when Kate, appeared on the screen and became a star immediately with Elizabeth. But whatever.
Whatever.
Gwyneth doesn't act anymore. Kate has 2 Oscars. The grudge is dead. Um,
There you go.
so I have a couple of answers for this actually. I think, when we look, I know everybody these days sort of hates people winning for biopics, and that's like a trend with the Academy. But actually, one of the best biopic performances ever hasn't won, and it is Angela Bassett as Tina Turner in What's Love Got to Do with It. And it's heartbreaking because it came in a year that, Angela would still get my vote, but I think Holly Hunter is a worthy winner. So you can't quibble too much. So I think Angela's performance sort of gets lost when people talk about what is the quote unquote best loser because the winner was so worthy. But I think that's my answer is Angela Bassett and What's Love Got to Do with It, because she really, like, we talk about biopic performances, and in this series I'm sure we'll talk about one today.
Yeah, true.
But that was one that was just so ferocious and so alive, and it is something it's a story that, the person that she was playing is still alive and was actually quite, young when the movie came out. I don't remember. I don't actually know how old she was, but she was probably somewhere around 50 or something like that. And to play someone who's still in the cultural conscious and do it so well, I think Angela did it amazingly. I have another answer. It's a more recent one. And this is more of a we missed a chance to reward somebody, especially because the winner wins another one a couple of years later. So I'm thinking of Saoirse Ronan in Lady Bird, who lost to Frances McDormand in Three Billboards. And I think when I think of Saoirse Ronan as Lady Bird, it's kind of like it would have been an amazing thing to do, like a Diane Keaton as Annie Hall wins for her signature performance, or Natalie Portman as Black Swan. I think Lady Bird, so far, for Saoirse Ronan, young career is that role, that movie. So it would have been wonderful for her to win for it, especially since Frances wins a couple of years later for Nomadland, which is a better movie than Three Billboards, in my opinion.
Yeah, fair to say. Yes. That's a race that I feel like I've talked about with others maybe on this podcast already, is one where I feel like it could have gone to Saoirse, it could have gone to Margot Robbie even, it could have gone to Sally Hawkins, and it would have been a good moment for all of them. But
yeah,
obviously Frances McDormand does have that incredible speech, and the inclusion writer mentioned that kind of did change things for the industry in a way. But
yeah. So maybe it's not heartbreaking, but I guess when you look at it that way, it was an amazing moment.
Yeah. But in terms of just in a vacuum, that race, I would definitely agree with you that second win for Frances is a little bit unnecessary, I would say. But
yeah. And Saoirse was nominated again, and she probably will. But the heartbreaking thing with Angela Bassett is she never even came close to a nomination again. Like not even in the conversation seriously for any other of her roles since
I'm
then.
still waiting for that Oscar comeback, because if she really comes out with something really almost on that level again, I feel like maybe she might be undeniable. That's just maybe wishful thinking. I don't know.
I mean, she still has it in her.
She clearly does, yeah.
So it's just somebody needs to see that she has it in her. Somebody other than you and me. Somebody who's producing movies.
I know. Someone who has actual power.
Yeah.
Yes. Alrighty. Well, let us just jump right into this year at the Oscars, the 25th Academy Awards. The nominees were Shirley Booth for Comeback Little Sheba, Joan Crawford for Sudden Fear, Bette Davis for The Star, Julie Harris for The Member of the Wedding, and Susan Hayward for With a Song in My Heart, with the winner being Shirley Booth. So before we talk about these performances on an individual level, what would you say is sort of your overall take on this lineup now, having watched all of them over the past week or so? What are the big takeaways for you?
20-somethings playing teenagers is one. Betty playing Joan, or kind of doing a homage to Joan. I think
Yeah.
we'll talk about that. I haven't seen three of these movies before watching them to talk to you. So obviously I've seen Joan and Betty because
Yeah.
I'm a completist for both. But I haven't seen Come Back Little Sheba, and I've seen that on stage with Paisa Murkison. So I'm familiar with the story and with the play. I think she did it on Broadway like 10 years ago now. You know, I always say it was 2 years ago, and then I look at the date and it's like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So I was familiar with that. So I was excited to see how they made a movie out of it. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. But I guess my takeaway is that I'm excited to talk about this because it's, with the exception of Shirley Booth, these are actors I'm familiar with that I've seen in other movies. And so, you know, I came in with my own ideas about them, and that, you know, you can't separate yourself from what you already know and feel. But I was excited to talk about it. I don't think I made an eloquent point there. I lost my train of thought. Anyway.
It's okay. There's a lot to talk about with this lineup, I think.
What did you think of it?
Well, I do think, regardless of what you were kind of saying before we started chatting here, is that regardless of the quality of these performances, this does feel like one of those Best Actress lineups that isn't as talked about as much as it should be, perhaps, outside of hardcore Oscar obsessives who just watch everything. But I think we have a winner with Shirley Booth, who is, for one reason or another, not as remembered as a star as others who have won Best Actress. We have her and Julie Harris both making their film debuts here. I believe this is the only time where we had two Best Actress nominees in the same year, both making their film debuts. I tried to look that up, but I think that's right. It's also, you know, the only time we have Joan and Betty here competing with each other, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
I don't know if either of these performances are necessarily remembered as their very best, but we'll get into it. And then you have another performance from Susan Hayward here in a film that I personally don't find to be quite memorable, but it's kind of an odd lineup, I would say, that doesn't seem to have the special sort of pop as much as others do. But I think we'll find in this discussion that there's a lot to talk about with each of them. So
yeah, and the thing with Shirley Booth and Julie Harris, I think that was the tradition in that time. Like, if you do a show on Broadway and the show becomes, you know, adapted into a movie, you get to play the part, especially if you were raved and won a Tony, which I think Shirley Booth did, but I'm not sure about Julie Harris.
She won a lot of Tonys, Julie Harris. More on that later.
Absolutely. Yes. So that was what happened in those days, and now it doesn't happen as much, although it did happen. No. I mean, I haven't seen it, but I hear there's something called Dear Evan Hansen. So
yeah, speaking of older people playing teenagers, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, Ben Platt, the Julie Harris of our time. Sorry, that was blasphemous. Let's dive into this lineup. So we're starting off with, alphabetically speaking, a big one here, Joan Crawford for Sudden Fear. So her third and final Oscar nomination for Miss Joan Crawford. Sad to be done with her after this, but we definitely have a fun one to talk about here. So at this point in her career, she had won her Oscar for Mildred Pierce. She got another nomination a few years later for Possessed. And then her career was in a bit of a slump by the early 50s, and she has to be let go of her contract at Warner Brothers. And so she ends up at RKO making this film, Sudden Fear. So she's playing a woman named Myra Hudson, who is a very wealthy and very successful playwright who falls in love with one of the actors, Lester Blaine, played by Jack Palance, who's trying out for her new play. And they have a whirlwind romance, and they get married, and pretty shortly into the marriage, she's figuring out her last will and testament, and she intends to just leave everything to him, but her original will doesn't quite stipulate that yet. And Lester stumbles upon this original will alongside his old girlfriend Irene, played by Gloria Graham. realizing that he won't be getting much of anything in the event of her death, and they decide to hatch a plan, naturally, to murder Myra. But little do they know, of course, Myra's dictaphone is on, and it records their entire plan, which she later hears, and she's terrified, and she takes the recording out, but of course she breaks it, so she doesn't really have, like, physical evidence at this point. But the rest of the film becomes about them trying to murder her, essentially, and then her trying to kill him before he gets to her first. So, a very fun one to talk about here. Let's talk Joan. Murtada, what are your thoughts on the great Joan Crawford and her performance in Sudden Fear?
I mean, when I was watching this, I'm like, of course she was nominated, because it sort of plays to her strengths. Like, Joan has that face and those eyes, and this movie is all about that. Like, the sort of centerpiece scene, if we call it, is the scene where she's listening to the plot. And it's a scene that shouldn't work at all. It's just literally her listening to a voice recording of Gloria Graham and Jack Palance planning her murder. But it works because it allows her so many close-ups, and you get to see that face give us everything, show us all the emotions that she's going through. And it's a long scene, and it's all that I wanted to see. I wanted to gaze at Joan, and I got to gaze at her gorgeous, beautiful face for a very long time.
Yeah, it's an incredible scene. It's a true, like, you really see the silent film star in that moment where she's not saying anything, and it's just all registering on her face.
And I think the director sort of knew what he had with her, and that's probably why she was cast, because who can sort of hold the audience attention, hold the camera, hold us all in her hands for such I mean, I don't know how long it is, but it seemed like 10 minutes or more. Just sort of just looking at her face and her emotions and everything that she registers, and especially if you, like me, or I'm sure like you, because you've seen a lot of Joan's films too, like, that's what she's great at. That's when she holds that gaze and you look into her face and those eyes looking up, and it's such a trademark Joan thing. And here, that all is sort of punctured with this, as the title tells you, sudden fear that she's feeling, and how she's like grasping for her life, and everything that she thought was beautiful and wonderful about her life is in shambles suddenly, and she has to do all that. It's a great performance, great showcase for Joan Crawford.
Totally. Yeah, and I mean, I've previously talked about how much I love Joan Crawford. She just has the perfect kind of sensibility for my own personal tastes, which is just someone who really knew how to work her face, and knew her angles. And I think she works so well as almost like a scream queen here, which is really what she becomes by the end of the film. She has these like dark kind of severe features, and I just find her to be so compelling to watch as a screen presence. I've seen this before, and I really, really liked it, even if the plot itself can be a little bit silly, and I would say kind of convenient in how things unfold. But before we dive too much into the murder plot of everything, I did want to talk about their romance, which takes up the first 40 minutes or so of the film. So it's not insignificant, It starts with her being in the casting process for her new play, and he's on stage and he's performing, and she says he doesn't really have the right oomph to play the leading man, which is why it's so interesting that I think about a month passes, the play comes out, and she's going on a train to San Francisco. She sees him again, and I don't know, it's like she almost wants to make amends with him in a way for how things went down, maybe. And what's funny is just looking at it in hindsight, it's like, no, you were right from the beginning. Like, your instincts about him not being right were correct.
Also, it's like the casting of Jack Palance is so on point, because at the beginning, when she keeps insisting that he is not a romantic lead, and then you see his face, like, Jack Palance has an interesting face, but he's definitely not handsome. Like, the face is sort of like the camera loves him, but it's not a classically handsome face. And so I was agreeing with her. I'm like, he's not a romantic lead. I agree with you, Joan. Right. And so in the end, it's that casting sort of like comes, and yes, he is a killer.
Yeah, literally. Yeah.
Yeah, which is
'Cause
funny. I read in the notes that she wanted Marlon Brando, or somebody wanted Marlon Brando, maybe the director or somebody. Anyway, who would have been as intense as Jack Palance, but I don't think that line at the beginning of the film would have worked, especially
no.
Marlon Brando in 1951-52 being,
Yeah.
basically called not handsome.
Right. I would say he definitely has the right oomph.
Yes, the
For
intensity is there.
yeah, absolutely. But it's like, I think maybe if you're watching this as it's going, you're wondering, like, she's already dismissed him in the opening scene. Why is
Mhm.
she now taking an interest and now they're getting married? Like, what's the deal here? But yeah, I think if anything, this just serves to prove that she was right about him. But I think she sort of lets herself be wooed by him because maybe she didn't have anyone in her life at the time and she's getting older, so she got with him. Yeah, what do you think of just their chemistry?
I think the reason that she sort of falls for him is the way he looks at her. And I think what I liked about Jack
Fair.
Palance's performance in that first part of the film is that he looked at her so intensely, but also like so lovingly, like in a way that was like he was only seeing her.
Hmm.
And so it made the romance believable, or it made it believable that, Myra, is that her name?
Yeah,
Um,
Myra. Yep.
that Myra would fall in love with him. And so that was the part that I loved about the courtship scenes.
Yeah. They don't exactly seem like the perfect fit, but then there are these moments that are really good for Joan in particular where, they're in her room and she has her dictaphone and she's showing it off and she's telling him to try it out and he, quotes her own lines back to her and she's just visibly moved by it. You see that, she thinks this is finally someone who understands her and appreciates her and just for her creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, although I will say the actual line that she says is like, that he says that she wrote is like a sort of precursor to like the Oprah's whole thing about Gayle King, where she's like, she's the mother I never had. She's the sister everyone would want. Like it's
Yes,
very, very melodramatic kind of writing. And I
very
don't know.
flowery, and
Yes,
he's quoting her writing back to her. So
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, it was so funny when that scene started. I'm like, what is he trying to do? And then it's like it becomes funny, but also more believable that she would fall for him, because nobody would fall for those lines. But she wrote them, so she has to fall for it.
Of course, they came from her, right? So, I mean, after they get married, in comes Gloria Graham as Irene, who is actually the girlfriend of Myra's lawyer, Junior. So it's all a tangled web.
Hmm.
Gloria Graham, by the way, the supporting actress winner of this year for The Bad and the Beautiful. So I guess maybe this movie might have helped in that win, but
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely, for sure. Although I
yeah,
think probably she was nominated for the right film and performance.
no, yeah, I agree. But the whole plot is really set into motion here, where Myra is dictating her new plans for her will, and she goes to attend the party, but she happens to leave the thing on. And then Lester realizes that, Irene is there and they do their little conspiracy stuff in that room and they just lay everything out. Like it's very
Yes.
clear that he's only
They
really
don't
in it for
leave,
the money.
yeah, they don't leave anything. They
They
literally
don't.
say all their plotting and
Right.
even their history.
Right. They state it all very clearly. And like there's no room for nuance at all. Like if she dies in an accident, quote unquote accident, we'll be able to get all her money. It really is kind of funny how lengthy and detailed this conversation is.
Yeah.
Where if you brought this to the authorities, like it's like an instant charge of conspiracy.
Yeah, absolutely. Which it never crosses her mind to do that.
Well, because she breaks it, but
Yeah. But what I liked about that scene, despite sort of some of
Mhm.
the impossibilities that we just talked about, is
Yeah,
that until then, except for a couple of signs here and there, we are as in the dark about Jack Palance as Myra is.
Yeah.
And so there is something, when he leaves the train, he changes his trip. He was not going to go to San Francisco. He was just going to Chicago, whatever. Something like that, which is like, shady. But it could just be that he fell in love with Myra.
Right.
But so whereas in the dark, or if you're seeing it for the first time, of course, whereas in the dark about it as Joan is. So the revelation, which is all played on Joan's face, is also, despite the length of the scene, I thought sort of exciting.
Yeah. Even if this is like a change in perspective where Myra isn't present there, you do still feel like you're along for the ride with Myra.
Yes.
To a credit to the film. But we are obviously talked about the scene of her listening to it, and really for me just again proving why she was such a star through all these different eras of film, especially the silent era, where it's like, it's the Gloria Swanson and Sunset Boulevard thing where it's like we didn't need dialogue, we had faces. Right.
Yeah exactly.
Yeah, it's just her eyes that really tell the whole story. And I also love to mention eyebrows. Great eyebrow acting here from Joan.
Yeah.
There's nothing quite like a Joan Crawford arched eyebrow.
Yeah. And it's also just what she does with her face is so modulated. Like, yes, we talked about the eyes and the eyebrows, and the whole thing happens on her face, but it's never too much.
No,
it's not little, because it's just the right modulation of how to use your face to tell the story, to tell us what this woman was feeling at that time. And obviously, in an exaggerated Joan Crawford film noir 1950s sort of like melodrama, everything is there. Like you can look at it from so many sort of like views and still be enthralled by what she's doing. It's just amazing.
And I do just also want to mention the dream sequence, or I guess the nightmare sequence, where she's envisioning all the ways that Lester is going to kill her. Like, falling to her death, or like getting in a car accident, being smothered by a pillow. That's where she really gets to be her most scream queen, like very over the top camp. Really fun sequence for her. And then really for the rest of the film, she's really tensed up and just scared for her life, even in the moments where she's trying to get revenge on them. It's like there's always this very nervous tension, and we're, I think, literally seeing her sweat at certain points in these big close-ups. And I think it definitely becomes a very physical kind of performance, which, again, really does harken back to silent era.
Yeah. I mean, she does so much in this film. And like you said, she acts with her whole body. Yes, we talked about the face, but yes, she does a lot with her whole body. And, there's a lot of running, and there's a lot of things that she has to do. And there's a lot of sort of busy, silent acting, which, proves the point you were saying about, silent film acting. Because she doesn't, after the revelation happens, Joan doesn't really talk that much.
No, she really doesn't. The whole part of where she's gonna enact her whole revenge plan, even that part of it, like she's obviously not talking to other people about this plan. It's all in her head.
Yeah.
But I think that whole sequence is just chef's kiss. I love whenever a leading lady is gonna get one over on those guys.
Yes.
And she comes up with what I would honestly say is kind of a master plan, not gonna lie. And I think maybe even that's where the idea of her being a playwright makes sense story-wise and sort of fits in, because she's coming up with this huge, very creative scenario, and it's like the perfect crime, and we get that incredible shot where it's just this extreme close-up of her eyes, and you have like the shadow of this, the pendulum from the clock swinging back and forth, seeing all of that on her face as she's sort of running through this very like itemized breakdown of exactly how this is all going to go down, like with time stamps and everything.
Yeah, it's a naughty plot, but she manages to execute it.
She does, in a way. I mean, things go wrong eventually, but Yeah, I just love seeing how that whole sequence plays out of her like forging these notes to send to the both of them to go to different places, and then Myra is going to slip into Irene's apartment because she had a key made, and she's going to shoot Lester and I guess maybe frame Irene for it, maybe.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
really cool sequence, but of course, the way that all plays out is all like hypothetical best case scenario of her plan. The reality of it goes significantly worse because, it's impossible to time everything. There's always a variable, but honestly, I'm on the edge of my seat for like the third act of this whole film.
Yeah, me too. And sort of one of the things that I really loved about it is that she wears the same outfit the
Yeah.
as the Gloria Graham character. Like
Hmm.
not exact replica,
With
but
the
they're
headscarf, yeah.
yeah, the colors, like they're both wearing white dresses and scarves and
Hmm.
fur.
Yeah.
And so that makes it, and she even slyly says to her, I could go change,
Hmm.
since we're wearing the same color. But, it's really well done. And it's sort of like, it makes you just, like you said, immersed in this film. Like
Yeah.
it's really good. Although, like by the end, I think it goes in a little too longer. Like there's a lot of car chases, and that's where it kind of lost me a little bit.
Yeah.
I was more into the naughty plot, but the car chases, especially since they don't really use the sort of like, this is not, even though this movie set in San Francisco, you don't sort of like get a feel of San Francisco and sort of its hilly roads as much as you get in other movies like, What's Up Doc and all the other famous movies that use San Francisco really well.
Yeah. I would agree with that. It feels very contained, but you're probably right about the whole final sequence, even though this is where it should really ramp up and be like quick, quick, quick. It does feel strangely longer than it should be.
Yes.
It's a very complicated action set piece. But before that, what I did want to touch down on is another good moment for her where she is in Irene's apartment and she sees herself in the mirror with the gun in her hand, and it's sort of startling to her to see that image of herself. Like she doesn't recognize herself almost, and she might even be ashamed.
She's startled as if like, ooh, what am I doing here? Is that really me? Am I really
Right.
gonna kill him? Yeah.
Yeah. But by the end, this is where the screen queen horror type of performance, which I think is so rare to have as a nominated performance in Best Actress by this point, that's where that really comes into play, and I live for it, not gonna lie.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it's just like, the image of this glamorous woman where Joan Crawford just who looks spectacular in this movie from start to finish, but
Yes.
seeing her there and, being in peril and trying to figure out the plan and having to sort of run on pure adrenaline by that point because like things have gone wrong now and he's figured out what she planned for him. It's great, and all these elements really coming together to make something that I think is very engrossing, and I would definitely recommend this film to people who haven't seen it, not just for her, but for the film itself. Yeah, I just think it's really fun, and I think she brings the right level of terror and immediacy to the role that, yeah, I guess I'm sad that this is it. That this is her final nomination, but
Yeah.
honestly, three great nominations for Joan, three for
Yep.
three in my eyes, you
Yeah.
know.
I agree. And I think this is also sort of like the start of a new sort of career direction for her because she does a lot of
Absolutely.
these
Yes.
quote unquote scream queen roles after this. So it definitely is it triggered that shift.
Right. Yeah.
Obviously her, about to hit 50 also triggered that shift, but I
Hmm.
think it's because she did such a great job in this film.
Yeah. She's someone who definitely knew how to adapt to the times and went in the direction that felt that the people wanted. And I
Yeah.
think, a lot of us enjoy this era of Joan Crawford, so I think her instincts were correct.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. One thing I wanted to mention, Kevin, is
mhm.
that, I don't you don't really pay much attention to the credits, but I really love the credits. Like there was a whole page of credits about Joan Crawford,
Yeah.
At the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
You're used to like having, a makeup and hair person, but she had, somebody for her costumes, for her jewelry, and for her furs.
Yep.
So if you like glamorous, this just tells you how glamorous Joan Crawford is in Sudden Fear. She had
Yes.
like at least half a dozen people just so that she could look great.
Just for her, right? Yeah. Yeah, I love whenever that happens. It's happened a few times before, just watching these Best Actress nominees where, the actual actress is singled out for like Miss Crawford's costumes, and or even better yet, Miss Crawford's gowns, things like
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here the clinker for me was furs, Miss Crawford's furs.
Furs, that's the
Yeah.
best.
All right.
Yes.
Let's go. Let's go. I'm excited.
But yeah, I wish she was obviously nominated in 1962 with Bette Davis. We'll definitely have fun talking about her more there.
Yeah.
Just, not in the context of a nomination, but certainly in the context of that Oscar ceremony. So that is definitely something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to mention about Joan and her performance here?
Well, it's not exactly about Joan, but one thing I noticed, I just, wrote in my notes, is like it's so funny that and I don't know if one of them is Scandinavian, one of the characters, they don't, Joan Crawford and Jack Palance, they don't say cheers when they're drinking, and they do drink a lot, but they say skål, which I think
Skål.
is yes, it's Danish, right? I think it's in
Mm-hmm.
Danish. So maybe Myra is Scandinavian, or supposed to be. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a fun quirk.
Yes.
Yes.
But I agree with you. Like, this is, one of Joan's. I love a lot of Joan's movies, but this is definitely top there. And I'm happy that she got the third nomination. I think she deserved it.
Indeed. But I will just mention that Joan Crawford was thrilled beyond belief to get this nomination, as you might expect. And she apparently was crying in the bathroom when she heard of this news. And someone else, I don't remember who it was, but there was some producer who said, well, I mean, surely you were expecting this. And she was like, well, yes, but it was kind of like a great Joan Crawford diva moment. Like, of course, yes, I was expecting it, but it's always nice to get the recognition,
Yeah.
So that's Joan for you. Let's move on to her great friend, Bette Davis, in The Star. Whew. Okay, so this is Betty's 9th official nomination, 10th if you count her write-in for Of Human Bondage. So she's, further extending her record that would later be broken by Katharine Hepburn, and then later on, of course, Meryl Streep. But by this point, she is like the undisputed legend of this lineup. And
Katharine was about like 5 at this point, right?
Yeah.
So Betty had double Katharine's nominations, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. But yeah, I think this is almost like 20 years after her first nomination, so they really respected her more than any other actress at this time, I think. And the reason I say that is because The Star was not really a hit critically or commercially, and yet she did still manage to get this nomination. And there's a really fun backstory with this one, of course, that I'd love to get into, just to give us some context. It was written by Catherine Albert and Dale Unson, who were close friends with Joan Crawford for a long time. And they basically wrote this movie about Joan, more or less. And Joan maybe knew about this, and so the friendship ended. But Betty, I guess, jumped at the chance to do this part because they had been rivals by this point. They were competing for a lot of the same parts. They, upstaged each other. Betty just sort of had this resentment for Joan, according to many accounts. And Betty directly said after the fact that The Star was, yes, about Joan Crawford. She said, I wasn't imitating her, of course. It was just that whole approach of hers to the business as regards to the importance of glamour and all of the offstage things.
Yes, she is 100% right, because this movie, I mean, we just talked about how glamorous Joan is, and Maggie Elliott, played by Bette Davis in The Star, is supposedly glamorous, but that is her downfall, is that she is not an actor. She's just a glamorous star. And the movie is sort of like its whole plot, or its whole sort of treatise on why this star is no longer a star is that she can't give up the glamour to actually show her true self in front of the camera. Which
Exactly.
is it's always been Betty. Like Betty is known for like even when in 1935 or whenever she started becoming a star, she was known to be somebody who doesn't care about vanity or glamour, and she played a lot of unglamorous roles. In fact, that
Right.
was her thing, that she will give you what the character needs, even if she doesn't look good. Which is, yeah, she's right. That's the antithesis of Joan. But I don't think, I love glamour, but I
Yeah.
also love when somebody shows us, the grit of it all.
Right. I think the two can exist
Yes.
at the same time. Yeah. But let's talk about it. This is Betty still, riding high off the success of All About Eve. Only a few years earlier, she's in this nice upswing again. And this film, it's about a movie star who is also an Academy Award-winning movie star. So kind of a nice meta element there. And yeah, Margaret Elliott, she's been fading in recent years, but she wants to have her big comeback. And she has this DUI incident that lands her in jail. And she's bailed out by this former co-star of hers, played by Sterling Hayden. And he happens to like her and tries to essentially convince her to move on to other things in life, but she wants to stay in the business. She also happens to have a teenage daughter who she's sort of trying to keep up the ruse of her still being a star with. And yeah, that's essentially what the film's about. So I remember a while ago when we were talking about this Best Actress series that I think you were definitely interested in talking about Bette Davis. So
Mm-hmm.
let's explore this. What are your thoughts on her more as a performer, and what do you think of her very deliciously over-the-top performance in The Star?
So Betty Davis is my favorite actor from the golden age of Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
I have watched every movie that I could get my hands on for Betty Davis. I have
Wow.
watched some of them many, many times, including The Star, which I've seen at least twice. And I remember, like, when I started falling in love with movies and with actresses in particular, and, all the things that I loved about actresses, going big and unraveling in front of the screen and doing, and never hiding emotions and being so emotionally available at all times. Things that I've loved in a lot of actresses, from when I grew up and I watched all those Egyptian melodramas. And then I saw Betty Davis and I was like, wow, everybody I have fallen in love with was trying to do what Betty Davis has done before them. She is the blueprint for everything that I love about actresses and acting. And so I love her so much. Um, I'm just getting verklempt just thinking about that.
Oh.
I love her in this performance because it's also the movie might not be great, and it's definitely one of her lesser nominated performances as a film, not as a performance. But I think this is also one of those things that she is a maximalist to the extreme, and she is here. She does so much in this story. She is very funny. She gives this, at the beginning of the film when she's telling off her ex-husband's new wife. She's that imperious Betty that we have known and loved from things like The Letter. And then she goes through so many modes. She has so many notes to do. Like, besides the comedy, she breaks down. She has to give us all those big close-ups when she's like trying to act in the screen test later in the film. If you love Bette Davis, I think this is a performance that encapsulates a lot of the things that she is wonderful at. And it is, I just loved watching this again. Like I had such a good time watching Betty. There is a scene where she's talking to her Oscar while she's drunk. Like, what
Yes.
more do you want out of a movie in a Best Actress Oscar series? Like, this
True.
is the one.
True. Yeah, very, very meta. Yeah. It's really interesting to see her doing this role that is, somewhat akin to what she did in All About Eve, where there is some metatextual element of her having reached a certain age in her career and then
Yeah.
playing actresses who have also reached a certain moment in their career. I think there's even a level of self-reflection there that is compelling just from an audience perspective. Of course, Betty would continue on with her career for decades after this, so it's not like You know, she had to
Towards
give
the end,
everything
yeah.
up, even though she was only in middle age, like we see in All About Eve and then here in The Star. But then there were very few actresses like Bette Davis, so she maybe defied the stereotype of what happens to women in Hollywood as they age.
Yeah.
But
And if you love old Hollywood, like there's so many moments. Like there is a moment where she says, "I was called box office poison," which I don't
mhm.
think she was. I think it was Katharine Hepburn, right? But it's
Yeah,
still such a wonderful moment. You're just like, oh, okay. So
yeah,
it's just that kind of film.
it is. It's very much, if you're into, you know, Hollywood and film, you'll definitely pick up on the references.
You know, I said earlier in this podcast that my favorite Oscar-winning performance in Best Actress is Kate Blanchett and Blue Jasmine. And there is a
Yeah.
scene in this movie that reminded me. I mean, Kate in that movie is just out of this world, and every single scene is memorable, and the whole performance is memorable. But my most favorite scene is the scene where, in Blue Jasmine, she is with her sister, played by Sally Hawkins. She's telling her how, in her downfall, she had to work in a shoe store, and women, you know, that she used to be friends with came in, and, you know, Erica Bishop, one of her society friends, came in
Yeah.
and, you know, avoided her. And she tells this story, and, you know, it ends with that line, "I saw you, Erica," which everybody knows.
I
Um,
saw you, Erica.
exactly, yes.
Yes.
And the Star actually dramatizes that scene.
Yeah.
There is a scene where Maggie Elliott, played by Bette Davis, has fallen on hard times, and she has to also work in a department store, not in the shoe area, but, you know, an actual society ladies or sort of rich older ladies come in and recognize her as the movie star Maggie Elliott. And I was like, I can't believe this is meta on meta on meta. Like, this
Right.
is giving me every best actress thing that I love and that I want.
Yeah, there's a lot of really delicious stuff here. This is a performance that I think some people have said is bad and is over the top and is
They know nothing.
one of her worst. But I mean, I think this is a little bit lesser of a nomination from her, from the perspective of she did so many great things in the 40s that it's hard to
Mm-hmm.
compete. I know she has said that, you know, this was a really great script, but I wasn't a huge fan of some of the writing here. I think story-wise,
Yeah.
the film could have been a little bit sharper and maybe more nuanced than what we actually get, which does feel a little bit like it's cribbing off of All About Eve and Sunset Boulevard, except
Mm-hmm.
without as much of the depth, I suppose, of those films. So we definitely have this great over the top kind of performance, but maybe without the stuff to really live up to the greatness of the actress, which
Yeah.
is something that you know, in recent years has been true in Best Actress, where it's like the performer is who you go to see the movie for. Like, you
Yep.
know, Jessica Chastain in The Eyes of Tammy Faye. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, look at that great performance, except maybe the movie isn't quite up to her strength.
Yeah.
This is what that feels like for me here.
Yeah, and I think also the script is a little bit misogynist.
Oh, yeah, I think
Because
so.
like it's sort of in the end it's all about like, oh, the love of a good man will save you, and women should, like, as they age, they should go to pasture or whatever.
Right.
Like
Just
there
go
are a
out
lot of
gracefully.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think, like you said, it's sort of like it's cribbing from other better movies.
Hmm.
And I think also Bette Davis, as wonderful as she is, this is sort of like her greatest hits album, if you will, if
Yeah.
a performance
She's
can be
playing the
called that.
hits.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's playing the hits. She's playing things that she has played before. All the notes, yes, she gets so many notes to play, but every note she has played before and maybe better. But what's not to love about all of the greatest hits that you love condensed to
True.
you in one album in 1 2 hour movie?
Hmm. Yeah. I think it's a little bit less than 2 hours, but yes, I agree. There's actually something a little bit insidious about just the perspective of this story, speaking to what you were saying, where it feels like there's just kind of a level of contempt for this character to be wanting to continue on with this career in show business.
Mm-hmm.
And the movie kind of frames it as, you know, her still wanting to be like the leading lady ingenue type that she was in the past, and she's too old to be doing that. But I guess it can feel like the film is indulging a bit in her making a fool of herself.
Yeah.
by, then going to work in that department store and yelling at these two older women, or then, when she's doing her screen test, especially, and she bombs, there's just something about it that feels a little bit mean-spirited to me, because it's all really driving at that point that she shouldn't be doing this anymore, and that she should just settle down and be with this guy and be with her daughter, and
Yeah.
she should just give up this passion, even though she's good enough to have won an Oscar in the past. It's just, time to let go. And, how ridiculous of her for daring to want to continue on with her career. I don't know. It just feels like, there are only a few moments where we get some compassion here for what this character's gone through, and just having to confront about working in this awful industry, which I think All About Eve and Sunset Boulevard were able to blend those things better, which is to show how ruthless it can be, but then to also show some compassion to these characters. And I think that's maybe the key thing that was missing for me, just on a story level, not having anything to do with her.
Yeah. And I think also Bette Davis is somebody who has survived. She was in the position that Maggie Elliott is here, and she survived. But I think maybe she was able to sort of overlook that because she was doing a homage to Joan Crawford. She doesn't imitate Joan at all, but, everybody knows, like, she's playing a Joan Crawford character, somebody who was known for her glamour, for her beauty when she was younger, which was not what Bette Davis was known for, or was not her strengths at all. So I think maybe that made her agree to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe she's saying, I'll survive because I never relied on my beauty and glamour. I was always actor first.
Right.
And she took, and if you look at this performance, she's taking it as a serious acting job. Like, she is never less than fully committed in whatever Maggie Elliott goes through.
Yeah, she, in the beginning, she definitely has some great fun moments. For me, actually, the first act is my favorite part of the film, where she's telling her daughter, like, if you're a star, you never stop being a star. Yes. You see the way she's, like, lying to her daughter by saying, yeah, I have a new picture shooting in 3 weeks, which I think is one of those more vulnerable, compassionate moments that we get in the film. But then she definitely gets to be, like, when she's screaming at her sister and her brother-in-law about having lost all the money and being like, can't you get it through your thick skull that I'm broke? And just, all these great snappy lines.
She's doing the little foxes there.
Exactly. Yes, and she kicks her sister out of the house, and, she's looking at her Oscar, which is it's fun to track wherever the Oscar shows up throughout the film.
Yes.
We see it in the background sometimes.
It makes many appearances, but it's also starring in one scene where it's almost a character, because she literally talks to the Oscar.
Yes. Come on, Oscar. Let's you and me get drunk. Iconic.
Yes.
But of course, leading up to that scene where we have this joyride of her drinking and driving, and she literally has the Oscar on her dashboard. Probably my favorite scene in the movie.
Yes,
and absolutely. She does like a little cheers moment with the Oscar. It's great.
Yeah. And she's taking us through Hollywood, and she's telling us who lives where and what the stars are. Some I think she mentions by names, and others you're supposed to sort of like try and guess based on her descriptions, because she describes all of them. Perfect, like amazing.
Yeah, and of course there's the moment where she's put behind bars and she's sort of yelling things like, "You don't seem to know who I am." And I have to say, I was reminded of a certain other Oscar-winning actress who was pulled over and made a big deal of who she was. Love you, Reese.
Yes. Oh my God, that's so funny.
I did think of that in that moment. Don't you know who I am? Anyway, she gets picked up by Jim, played by Sterling Hayden. And I guess she like helped him out once when he was younger and helped to get him into the business. But then he's like, this is not for me. And yeah, he takes her to his place. She kind of freaks out when she sees on the front page that the news of her arrest is now out there. And she calls her daughter, and you really hear just the panic and like the desperation in her voice when she's saying like, oh, everything's all right. Yeah, and then we get to learn even more about how she got to this place in her career when she's saying how she was sort of tired of all the tripe that she was getting after a certain point and deciding to want to finance her own movies. But then the studio didn't really support her and they didn't make money. And so she was labeled box office poison.
Yeah. And that story is sort of reminiscent of a little bit of both Betty's story and Joan's story too, because, Joan left MGM and went to Warner Brothers because they weren't giving her the movies. And Betty sued Warner Brothers and tried to get out of it because they were not giving her the movies that she wanted. Although for Joan, it was in the 40s. For Betty, it was in the 30s. But it's kind of both their stories.
Yeah. And I also think to a certain extent that whole backstory feels like something that hasn't really changed all that much in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like this felt like a discussion that could have been had today about
absolutely,
certain actors that take a chance on something, but then the powers that be don't really support them on their sort of more creative endeavors, and then it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy sort of thing. So
yeah,
in that way, it's quite incisive. But
so before we move on from Jim, who is played by Sterling Hayden,
sure.
One thing I wanted to say, my favorite line, there are so many wonderful Bette Davis line deliveries here, but his best line delivery is when she's talking to him about all these things, but she's always quoting her previous movies to him. Yeah. She's like, oh, you're going to treat me like this and that, which happened in this movie that was released in whatever year, and the critics called it okay or whatever. Yeah. Lots of fun. And he says to her, can't you ever think beyond the script? Which to me was just like, this is such a dig at Joan, but
it really is. Yeah. Yeah, those kinds of scenes feel like they come from a very deep place for, Joan's friends to have to. They probably have thought that several times, but anyway.
And I'm glad you made that distinction, because if anybody's to blame for the star having all these digs at Joan Crawford, it's not Bette Davis. It's Joan's previous friends who wrote the screenplay.
Right, Joan's so-called friends.
Yes.
My goodness. With friends like these, who needs enemies? Anyway. She eventually she's sort of convinced that she needs to try on this new career, and she goes to work at that department store, as we were saying. And it goes about as well as you might expect. And I will say I found the way that played out to be quite over the top in a not so great way, where we have these two older women who she hears talking about her, and then they say that the store should have hired a jailbird. I think that's their word for her.
Yes.
And she just completely erupts on them and calls them a couple of old bags and saying she's always going to stay Margaret Elliott.
Yeah. My favorite also line here from Betty, she's so wonderful in this scene, because it's like a big, sort of breakdown of her. She's loudly yelling at them, and they're like, oh, you can't talk to us like this. And she's like, I don't care. Call the manager. Call the fire department. Which is, why would they call the fire department? It's just so funny.
That is funny. That is a good line. Although I will say I did think about how I would also be in this scenario. Like, let's say, Murtada, you and I we're just shopping at Macy's or something, and we see someone like a Faye Dunaway behind the counter. Like, how surreal would that be?
That would be amazing.
I mean, she's this, as they say, Margaret Elliott is an Oscar-winning star, so like...
Yeah, but unlike those older ladies, we won't call her a jailbird. We'll be like, Faye or whoever. We love
Miss
you.
Miss Dunaway.
Miss Dunaway. How amazing to meet you.
Yes.
Like, whoever it is, any Oscar-winning actress, if we ever see her in any situation.
Amen. Yes. Well, we have to talk about the screen test. We get to this point where she demands to get a part in this new project, and they ask her to screen test. How rude. But it's not for the leading role, it's for the older sister, which is a supporting part. And she decides to basically try to outsmart the director and the producers by sort of playing it like the ingenue and making this part that is not supposed to be sexy Like she's playing like this sullen older sister who's like scrubbing the floor, and she's
Yeah.
making that into like this almost like Blanche Dubois type of performance.
So that then they see her for the sexy, glamorous woman she is and give her the lead part. Like that's her plan.
That's the idea. Yeah. And for her, it's an interesting meta moment where this is Bette Davis as Margaret acting poorly. You know, there's levels to it. And I think doing it quite convincingly, although I sort of wish that it was toned down just by a little bit so that, you know, in the moment she would think that she was nailing it and sort of bringing the right approach to it. And maybe we might too with the way she does it. But yeah, you just don't even know what she's thinking by going about it in such like an obvious over the top way and making the character of Margaret actually seem like a bad actress, you know?
Yeah. And I think, again, this is where Betty playing a character who's a homage to Joan, maybe this is what she thinks Joan acts like.
Ooh,
but anyway.
Good point.
But before that, I think, Bette Davis does not do a Joan Crawford imitation in any way, except she's just commenting on her. But I think the only maybe scene where you can see a little bit of an imitation of Joan Crawford is the scene right before the test where she's putting on her makeup and she is putting on Joan Crawford's makeup. Like she's doing the eyes, she's doing the Joan's hair, famous hairdo. And it's like, oh, this is where you're totally going 100%. This is Joan Crawford.
Yeah. That's a good point. Thank you for pointing that out. It really does feel like in that moment, it's like, oh, if you didn't know it already, this is Joan.
Yes.
But then after the fact, we get this moment in the screening room and she's watching her own performance and like yelling at the screen and telling herself to shut up and be like, you don't know anything, a fun campy moment there, at least, where she's literally yelling at herself for her own performance.
Yes.
So the last scene is her at a party. There's this guy who's there who's pitching her a movie that would more or less be exactly what her own story is, which is like an actress at the end of her career and can't really accept that it's the end of her career. And she definitely has
asshole.
Yeah, it's rough, but she has a lovely sort of face journey as she's realizing what's the deal here and also partly what her life has become, I guess, in a way. So somehow it's just this one conversation that makes her suddenly have some self-awareness, and she runs into the arms of Jim and her daughter, and it's, I guess, implied that now she's just going to retire and live a happy, nuclear family 1950s life. I don't know. Not a very satisfying ending to me, but
no. I also really hated that speech because from that screenwriter, I was just like, because it's where all the misogyny and sort of like the hatred of this character comes, basically it's crystallized into one speech and one character. And also I just don't think the movie or the writers of this movie love even movies that much, because it paints, being an artist in the movies as this sort of empty life. And, I think the line that really I cringed at and I hated is when he says something about this woman that he's writing, which is, Margaret is denied the glory of being just a woman. I'm just like, what does that even mean?
I know.
But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It sort of leaves a bad taste in my mouth by the end. The problem for me is that, when Bette Davis is good, she's really good. And when she has material that isn't really up to her standards, it just feels like regular fare from her. And to be fair, like, her baseline is good. So I guess my standards are just a little bit higher when it comes to Betty. And this is just sort of B tier for me. Still a lot of fun, but just not one that I would turn to as much as others.
Yeah. And you've been watching these chronologically, so you've just seen the heights of the 40s and what she has done, and even the 30s. So yeah, and just 2 weeks ago, All About Eve.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Yeah.
It made me want to go watch All About Eve again, but I still had so much fun with the star.
Yeah. I mean, All About Eve is like the star, but a whole lot better. And yeah, we only have one more Betty to talk about in about a decade, 1962, literally a decade. So yeah, I'm sad that we're coming to the end finally, even though I've talked about her so many times now, but I can never get enough of Betty. So
me too.
Yeah.
I love Betty so much. I was so happy that I get to come and talk to you about this and about what makes Betty just Betty. Like I said, to me, she's the blueprint of what actors should do. Like, it's just when you look at something like now Voyager and sort of like the journey she takes in it, it's all the things that I love. Somebody who transforms in the movie as the character transforms, but also the performance is transformative, and you get to see so many facets of the actor in just one movie, where you see, just her. I love Imperious Betty, like in Of Human Bondage or in The Little Foxes, where she's just so haughty and above everybody else, and it's so delicious.
It is.
And who else can make you, can star in a movie that's just about how wearing a red dress ruined your life? Like, only Bette Davis.
Yeah, she really just had a really important corner of the market, of the film market, with these really incredible sort of flawed women in the lead that a lot of actresses might not have felt comfortable taking on, but she just always was going full force into these characters from the 30s all the way till 80s. So let's move on to Julie Harris for The Member of the Wedding. So this is definitely a unique performance compared to really any of the other performances that I've talked about in this Best Actress series so far. So Julie Harris was in her mid-20s playing what is supposed to be a 12-year-old girl here. And because we haven't talked about Julie Harris before this, I'll just give a little more info on her here. She had done quite a bit of stage work in the 40s. She was very much a theater actor, and one of the plays she starred in was The Member of the Wedding, which was also based on a book. And when it came time to adapt it to a film, she, of course, reprised this role and is making her film debut here. And unfortunately, we won't be talking about her again after this, because this is her only Oscar nomination. But Julie Harris definitely went on to have a long career. She won multiple Emmys for her TV work. She won 5 Tonys. Yeah, I mean, she had a lot of acclaim in her lifetime. She was actually also the original Sally Bowles in I Am a Camera, which was the precursor to Cabaret.
Was East of Eden after this?
Yes.
That was her, right?
Yeah.
I wonder why she wasn't nominated for East of Eden. It's like it's 1955.
Yes.
So it's 3 years after this. Yeah.
Yeah. But she was kind of a big deal in her time, especially the 50s. I don't know how much she's known among newer generations compared to some others here, but very respected.
Yes. I don't think movie buffs know her a lot, because I have heard of all these, like, I've obviously seen the Joan and Betty, and I've heard of the other 2 movies, but this is the first time I'm ever hearing that there is a movie that existed that's called The Member of the Wedding.
Well, let's talk about it, because I'm sure there's plenty others out there like you who had no idea that this thing existed before now. So she's playing Frankie Adams, who's a 12-year-old girl who is a bit of a tomboy. She's very temperamental because she's at that age, and she acts out when her older brother decides to get married, and she kind of feels slighted by this because she wants to go with them on their honeymoon and everything, but she obviously can't. Most of the film is spent at her home, which is where her housekeeper, Bernice, takes care of her while Frankie's father works all the time. Her mother's dead, so Bernice really does a lot of the raising of Frankie, and she's also visited by her younger cousin, John Henry, and it's basically the 3 of them in this one room for about an hour until it's time for the wedding, and that's where she acts out and things take a bit of a dark turn. We'll get to that later, but let's talk about it. Very curious to hear your opinions on this one, because Julie Harris in The Member of the Wedding, from what I've read, is a divisive performance. So where do you fall on this one?
Yeah, this one was rough, I have to say.
Okay, well, there you go.
It was very rough. And this was the first, one that I watched when I
uh,
started watching this. So, I just think it's one of those things I can understand why it's divisive, but I would say 80% of people might find this just not just rough. She's very affected, and it's also she's not only affected in because she's playing a 12-year-old, so the way she looks is completely like, she's made to look like a 12-year-old tomboy, which physically it's a strange look. And then also it's just the way she talks. There's an accent. I'm not American, so I am not a good judge of accents, but that didn't strike me as good accent work. Like I think the story is set in the South, right?
yeah.
Um, so that was too much to just listen to. And everything is just so big. She is the antithesis of being natural on screen. And especially in that first hour, which is really rough, her scene partner is Essa Waters, who's so warm and natural and is just has one of those she's giving one of those performances where she's just being on screen, where it's like everything that comes out of her is like you believe it as how somebody would act. When Julie Harris, in my mind, is doing something that no human can be. Like, I know she's supposed to be a 12-year-old going through a nervous breakdown, but also just like watching a nervous breakdown happen over however long this movie is, which felt like 17 hours, is just completely not a good time. So I'm sorry, Julie Harris. So sorry to Julie Harris, but yeah,
Wow.
yeesh.
I didn't really know what to expect with this performance or this film. I think, it's always up in the air when it comes to adults playing teenagers. With something like Joan Fontaine, I did find her to be somewhat convincing in The Constant Nymph. And with this, I would say not as convincing, to put it lightly, but definitely took a lot to adjust to what she was doing. I don't know if it's just the nature of me settling into the performance more over time, or if it was just something where her performance felt better by the end for me, but the beginning was not great, and I felt like she got better over time, I suppose, and
Hmm.
not as feeling as distracted by the affectations. And she's supposed to be a 12-year-old girl, even though she doesn't look like a 12-year-old girl. She looks like a, 18-year-old. But I don't know about you also, but she was also giving me a young Cynthia Nixon here, just saying.
Yeah, I could see that. But also, she just also the thing that really is troubling is that she doesn't stop talking. Like the first hour, she
Never.
literally does
Never.
not stop talking.
Yeah.
And so it's just like if you even have the slightest negative intonation about this performance, it just that exasperates it to the nth degree because she does not stop talking with
Yeah.
that accent, with that affected voice, with everything else. It's too much, and I think it gets better to your point because it's really stage bound at the beginning, like the first whatever it is, hour 10 minutes, where they're
Mm-hmm.
just in the kitchen, the three of
Right.
them. And then things happen and she goes out, which we will talk about. And then I think I don't know that it becomes better, but at least there's less of it. She's not
Right.
talking as much and she's doing other things. So there's less of this big affected performance that's so in your face that you just can't turn away from. Like it literally, I kept looking around, like, can I look somewhere else? And,
Yeah.
and you can't because she doesn't stop talking.
I know. Yeah, that's a really good point, that if you're not like keyed into what she's giving in that first very long hour, then you're just going to have a miserable time with this because there's not a lot of variation there, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah.
And in terms of her behavior, I think it's interesting to watch this sort of, as an adult and recognizing the behavior of Frankie and how awkward she is, and maybe being turned off by how she's always having these big outbursts and acting very selfishly and really kind of pestering everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But then still remembering, I probably had those kinds of phases when I was a kid that came with just growing up and having an attitude and wanting to act out because you're in that weird sort of middle stage between being a kid and being an adult, and just sort of feeling constrained by that, but also still being kind of immature in many ways.
Yep.
And I guess on that level, like on paper, Julie Harris actually does recreate that feeling, just in the way she's always busy and restless, and like her body language is so active. Also, this is kind of, it's also another tangent, but there's another part of this film that did interest me beyond just what the performances were, that definitely it felt like it was through a queer lens in a way.
Yes. Yeah.
Where she's talking about wanting to change her name to F. Jasmine. She feels different from the other girls. And then also we have John Henry here, who's still pretty young, but he likes to like walk around in high heels, and he puts on a dress at one point. He seems very sensitive, and there's a point where it just feels like, you know, this is the story of Ethel Waters taking care of these two like misfit queer kids who are sort of expressing themselves in these ways that are outside of whatever the norm is in the 50s. So I guess in that respect, it was interesting to watch this just as a film. But
I think I agree with you that the characters are definitely queer-coded, especially hers. But I don't think the performance is queer-coded at all. Like, I did not recognize a queer person in what she was doing.
No,
except she gets like a short haircut, but that's it. But that's not the performance. That's just the sort of like how she was, presented. So I think maybe Julie Harris, if she had tried to, which I'm sure she knew that that's what she was playing, but she did not sort of queer code her performance in any way.
That's a fair distinction. Yeah, I think, just speaking to, again, with the structure of the film, it's just really fascinating because it feels like there's very little attempt to really transform this from the stage show. Because, you know, we spend almost an hour of this 90-minute movie in the one house, and for the most part, it's just the three of them just talking, and there's not a whole lot of tangible action that takes place, and a lot of it is just her having these outbursts, or just like trying to wrap her mind around something like love, and you know, she wants to be a part of her brother's relationship with his fiance or something, and she's like complaining about the local girls and yelling at them, and she's just obsessed with being a member of something, hence the title, Member of the Wedding, which is a little bit forced in my opinion, but just the way that that's weaved in. But I think, she just wants to be part of something, and she wants to go out there and explore things, which is fine. It's relatable and something that even I felt growing up. But the way that she expresses that is so over the top. And it's like, there's just no filter there. And it really feels like she's kind of just doing what she did on stage. Like, there's really no attempt to adapt this performance to film.
Absolutely. And this is maybe when they should have cast somebody else, or at least asked her not to just give the same performance, which, you know, I mean, this was her debut, right? So she had no sort of film experience, and I think she was very successful from what I could glean from the little research I did about the play. She was acclaimed in the play. So she just did it again. Like, it was just one more performance. Let me just stand on this soundstage and give the same performance that I have given hundreds of times before. And I'm just like, no, Julie.
It looks, sometimes it feels like she's really just playing to the cheap seats, and it sometimes even looks like she's literally looking up into the theater and saying these lines.
There's a lot of that. And also just, there is something kind of dead about the performance in that it never comes alive. It's just as if somebody, you know, is relying on sense memory. Like, that's the sort of thing that I sort of got from it. Like, there is nothing there that sort of tells me this is an actual alive human being. She's just saying the words she's used to saying. And no matter what Ethel Water gives her, the performance doesn't vary at all. And it's just like, and I know you know, we talked about how she just keeps talking, but that's how she just keeps talking. And then, you know, Ethel Water, or the younger actor who plays the cousin, will interject. And before they could even like say a lot, she's back to talking again. And it seems like as if she's just waiting for them so that she could go back to this long monologue. And it did feel like an hour-long monologue in this affected performance, affected accent, whatever she was doing.
I'm glad you said that, because there were parts for me where I felt bad because I felt like I was really zoning out watching this. And just like my attention was wandering as she was on these long monologues. And I'm like, this, even just the way that the dialogue plays out for her, it doesn't really grab me. And so I felt like my attention was wandering, unfortunately.
Wow.
I don't know about you.
Yeah. You're excused, Kevin. How could you not?
I didn't know if that was just a me problem or the movie being what it is. But
no, I think it's the performance. I mean, also the movie doesn't try to do anything except just sort of like hold the camera in a mid shot at either at the three of them or sometimes just her. And I'm just like, there is nothing. Like I was, as I said earlier, I was trying to look anywhere, but there was nowhere else to look.
Yes, so you were trapped.
Yes, exactly. I felt really trapped by this performance.
Yeah, it's a bit of a suffocating movie, I would say.
Yeah.
Doesn't help that it feels like it's, hot. It's like the hot, sweltering South. But what else is there? We could definitely talk about the last half hour, although I do just want to mention that I do think Ethel Waters is by far the best part of this movie, and should maybe have a nomination herself. I guess you think she would be in lead? Probably lead, right?
Probably lead, yeah. And she gets stopped billing.
She does, even over Julie Harris, yeah.
Yeah, she stopped billed in this movie, so definitely. And in those times, if you are top billed or you're a star, no matter how long or short your part is, you were put in lead.
Correct.
So she would have definitely been put in lead. And I would have liked to see her instead of Julie Harris. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree, especially honestly, that's a good comparison where like Ethel Waters has a few monologues of her own. And for those moments, I did find myself more drawn into the film, more so than what Julie was giving, which felt very samey. Whereas Ethel, I felt like there's a lot of depth and a lot of pain, and you feel like that is an actual real person.
Yes, totally.
So,
and especially towards the end, like she has that lovely moment at the end. And I think also I like that moment because Ethel Waters is great, but I also liked it because Julie Harris was quiet. Right. So.
Right. So, but with the... This is so shady. She does pull off the big stunt at the wedding. She takes her suitcase into the car and she's being very petulant about, wanting to go with her brother and his wife. And she's literally dragged out of the car. Tough scene to watch, but you certainly feel the melodramatics. I mean, I've seen incidents like this with kids having tantrums. It's kind of sort of just embarrassing for everyone. Definitely feel that in that scene. But then I think we get to the most interesting maybe part of the film where she decides to run away, and she wanders around town and she goes into this bar and she meets a guy who I think is like a college student, and he seems a little too into her, and they go back.
Wasn't he a soldier? I thought he was a soldier.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, must be. Yeah, it's probably soldier, but still, he's a young man. And
see, Kevin, you don't even remember. Julie Harris has blinded you to everything else.
I know, right? Whatever. But yeah, he tries to kiss her, and she immediately reacts very violently in that moment, and she like knocks a pint of beer over his head and runs away. But I think you really, for that, you see the nervousness for her in of her being in a new environment, especially when you're younger and you don't know about this new wherever you are, and you're so anxious and squirmy. This is a very physical performance, and in that respect, I don't think that this is a bad performance, maybe as much as you do, but I think just the physicality of it is the most impressive part to me. And, however annoying she may be up to that point, you are at least rooting for her to get out of this situation unscathed. And
yes, for
I
sure.
think just the way that she, the physicality that she brings to it in that whole bar sequence, I found noteworthy.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like those scenes are definitely because we left that kitchen and she's not talking as much. And so I think those were the two main reasons why those scenes sort of work better.
Yeah.
And yes, and you also sort of feel for the character, somebody who so far, at least to me, has been really annoying.
Yeah.
But you not annoying enough to just want her, just you don't want to see her in peril despite
Right.
how annoying she is. You sort of understand her. And also, like, I think the big thing here is that she has pretended so far to be like, she wants to be a member of something, but also like as if she knows what the world is about. And sort
Right.
of in that scene, you just, she discovers and we discover that she's just a pretender. She's just a little kid who doesn't really know, who's afraid, and the world is still scary to her. And, she retreats back home, and
Exactly.
she should be.
Yes. So I would lightly encourage people to check this out. I'd be curious just to hear what people have to say about Julie Harris's performance, because again, I walked away feeling a little bit better about it than I was feeling in the beginning. But yeah, it's one of those performances where you're definitely going to have a take on what she's doing. So there were clearly enough people who felt positively about it that she got this nomination. So
yeah, she probably got the nomination on the strength of her stage work.
Yeah.
But it's so surprising to me that it's her only nomination. Like, I know that she didn't have exactly a big career, but she's been in a few films.
Yeah. Not as big of a career in film, but yeah, TV and theater were her two things. Yeah. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have on Julie Harris. Shall we move on to our final losing nominee?
Let's do it.
Alrighty, Susan Hayward with A Song in My Heart. So this is her third nomination, previously nominated for Smash Up, The Story of a Woman, and My Foolish Heart. This is another Heart title here. And I think by the standards of what this lineup is, we have Bette and Joan, who already have Oscars, Shirley Booth and Julie Harris both making their film debuts, so they're kind of untested in Hollywood, which sort of means that by process of elimination, like if there's anyone who has a little bit of a narrative to be rewarded, it might be Susan Hayward. I wouldn't go so far as to say that she was overdue by this point necessarily, but
this is her third, right?
This is her third. She was clearly in the club by this point. Yeah. 3 nominations in 6 years is pretty good. But
yeah, that's of course, pretty great.
Yeah, as we know, Susan would have to wait a little bit longer for her Oscar, but it would come at least. So we have Susan here playing a real-life singer named Jane Froman. Quick note for those keeping track at home, this is the first biopic type of performance in 4 years that was nominated in Best Actress.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
really?
The last one was Ingrid Bergman for Joan of Arc in 1948. So she's playing Jane Froman, who she was a rising singer in the 30s. She went on to a trip to entertain the troops in a USO tour during World War II, and her plane crashed, and she suffered some injuries, including one of her legs, which was at risk of being amputated, and she insisted on keeping it, and she went on to entertain the troops and made certain accommodations so that she could keep singing. And she also has a bit of a love triangle with her husband and then one of the co-pilots on the plane, who she gets to know during their recovery, and they seem to really connect to each other. So that's the story. So let's talk about it. I mean, this film, it opens with a message, and it says, this is a true story, the story of a girl and the story of a voice. The girl is Jane Froman. The voice is her own. So, do you think that that voice is an interesting one? And what do you think of Susan here?
Well, she's better than Julie Harris, so that's already an improvement.
Let's celebrate that.
Yes. I don't know anything about Jane Froman. I've never heard of her, so I don't know if she's doing an imitation or not. And she obviously didn't sing, which was kind of like what they did in those days. So it's actually Jane singing.
Right.
I don't know. I didn't think she played a singer. She was more of a traffic conductor. There was a lot of stuff with her arms. Like every time, and there were a lot of scenes of her singing. There's so many songs in this movie, and so many long songs, and it's just her on stage, Susan Hayward, and she sings with her arms. And I think it's because it's not her voice. So she's trying to do something. She's like, oh, let me just conduct traffic here, left, right, north, south. That. Like there's so much with her arms. I think it's so funny. It reminded me of Rebecca Ferguson in The Greatest Showman.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I like that.
She was also directing traffic. There was a lot.
That's true.
Of arm acting. And I think Ferguson was a little more subtle than Hayward here. Yeah, this was another slog. I'm sorry. I didn't enjoy this film at all. I was very happy to see Selma Ritter. So
yes.
I was like, oh, Selma Ritter.
A queen.
And definitely what a queen. And the thing is, I've seen Susan Hayward's Oscar-winning performance in I Want to Live. And what's the other one? The one that comes after this. I can't remember.
Cry Tomorrow?
Yes, so I've seen those two before. And so I could just say to all the Susan Hayward fans, after there, she gets better. That's all. She's really good in those two movies.
It's good to end strong. Yeah. Yeah. So I generally like Susan Hayward in a lot of her films. She definitely brings a certain oomph, to bring it back to Sudden Fear, to her characters. But yeah, she definitely, she's able to infuse some of her characters with a personality that can sometimes be lacking on the page, which I think is definitely the case here. This definitely reeks of the subject having a close involvement with the crafting of the story, because Jane Froman sort of comes across as kind of like an angel who's been sent from above, and I feel like the way that she's portrayed, outside of the love triangle stuff, it just feels so removed and surface level, and it feels like it's coming from the perspective of someone else, really, which is literally the case in multiple sequences where other characters are narrating the story. Like, we never actually hear her explain the situation. It's all kind of putting her on a pedestal.
And the love triangle was it sort of kind of came out of nowhere. Like, they meet, and then the next scene he's telling her he wants to spend the rest of his life with her. I was like, did I miss a scene? Did I fall asleep and miss a scene?
I know. And then I thought the same thing.
Yeah, it's very strange. It seems as if they were avoiding exploring the fact that she was in love with another man while she was married or something. There was something very moralistic going on there.
Yes, very much so. It was like, we have to cover this other part of her life, but we want to be as careful as possible with how we have to be delicate with it.
Let's just omit all of it. That's how they got to be
pretty
delicate.
Much. Yes. But I think for the most part, we don't really get a sense of who this person is, other than someone who just really likes to sing and make people happy.
Yeah. To give her credit, I would say that the first sort of long scene in this movie, which is the first audition meeting of Dawn, who's the man who becomes her manager and husband. It's a very long scene, but I thought that it established a lot about sort of like what kind of singer she is, what she wants to accomplish, what she's looking for. It, again, to your point, it doesn't get too personal, apart from the fact that she's a really good singer and this is what she wants to do with her life. But it also had sort of, I like that it was unharried and that it wanted to establish sort of why should we care about Joan Froman. And I think that sort of first part of the film was the best part in the film itself and just in Hayward's performance.
Yeah, I just don't really have a lot of interest in this character.
Yeah.
Beyond just, obviously, the, circumstances of her getting into this plane crash and wanting to soldier on. It just feels like such a surface level, almost like a highlight reel of this woman's story,
Yeah,
when
in
I'm
this
sure
in
she
the
struggled even more than what we see, but I don't feel like we see a lot of that.
No. And there's some odd things in the screenplay. Like they made such a fuss about how she changed seats. They in the
Yeah,
plane crash, the pilot or somebody, the first officer comes and tells them, make sure you sit in your seat that was assigned to you. And then she doesn't for
right.
some convoluted reason. And then I don't know, is that why she's alive? I
Yeah,
think that
it's
the woman
implied
who's
that the woman who did sit in her seat did die, so that would have been her.
Yeah, so I think it's the point that I was trying to make here very ineloquently is that it makes such a big fuss of a seat number, and that is a main plot in this film, but it also doesn't tell you anything about this woman. Like
Right.
this is such an odd storytelling, such an odd script that
Hmm.
they make, mountains out of little things that mean nothing in the end, it mean very little, while actually telling us about how this woman met this pilot and fell in love with, which is not only something in her life, but also something in your movie.
Right.
Um, and then they omit so many things, I assume,
Yeah,
from life.
I would think so. For the first hour or so, I guess I might disagree because I really wasn't all that impressed with very much in terms of the film or the performance. I mean, the visual design, I will say, is quite dazzling for 1952 with the Technicolor, but it feels like pretty rudimentary stuff all the way up until the plane crash. Like, she's very
Mhm.
agreeable and warm, and she has a comforting presence, which is right for what the part is. Just what I find the most impressive from her actually in the film is I think she does a pretty good job lip syncing. Arm movements maybe aside, certainly that's over exaggerated, but I think this was not a case for me where it's like she starts speaking and then she sings and then it's like, oh my God, these are two different people. It felt pretty seamless. I felt like they were in the same vocal range, like the contralto
Mhm.
range. So I was at least convinced by her in the actual performance aspect of lip syncing for her life.
Yeah.
But I would agree also that the actual performances, I don't know why we need to have like these 4 to 5 minute sequences of like the full performance played out. And it's like
Yeah.
it's the same sort of thing over and over. It's not really establishing anything new. It's just serving to, it feels like it just turned into a concert movie at a certain point.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's for Jane Foreman fans, or Froman, is that
Sure.
Jane Foreman, so that they can listen to all her songs
Yeah.
in their entirety.
Yeah. So that's something. um,
I mean, the highlight for me was her scene with Selma Ritter, the one where she wants to
mhm.
give up and she says she's gonna kill herself or she wants to die. And then
Yeah.
no nonsense, Selma Ritter tells her off and that she has to live and continue living. And this is after the accident.
Right.
And I think that's the clip for both of them. Like if there is a clip, it's definitely that scene. And that scene is also, I liked it because, you see two actors sort of acting together and interacting and having a moment, as opposed to a lot of this movie is just her singing or her having no personality, frankly,
Yeah.
in those other scenes. In this scene, sort of, she shows despair. She has some things to play and some notes to play and real emotional stakes there in that scene where she sort of like wants to give up on her life and all of that. And she's told off, and then you see that she thaws a little bit and she starts to change. So there's a lot going on. Maybe not a lot, but there's something going on in that scene as opposed to all the other scenes which didn't have a lot going in them.
Right. And that's why I prefer her scenes with Thelma. I think are probably her best. I
Mm.
agree. And, her complaining and saying like she's never going to get the chance to do all the things that women usually do, and Thelma's kind of boosting her up again, and I like their dynamic together. It
Yeah.
actually reminded me of, I don't know if you watched The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, but
Yes. Yes.
it
It's a
reminds
little
me
bit of.
of that dynamic, right?
Yes, totally. Also, like, there's a funny line there that I wrote down, and the things that she will not get to do include, like any other woman, include going shopping. And I was just
Yes.
like, Okay. Who is writing these scripts in 1952?
Yes, and I feel like she could still go shopping.
Yeah, like, why wouldn't you be able to go
I'm not quite sure
shopping? Yeah.
what the thing is that would hold her back from still being able to shop, but yeah.
Also, like going shopping being one of the three most important things a woman can do that
Yeah,
she
that's
mentioned,
another part of it that's like, okay.
that it
Yeah,
has to be mentioned.
of course. Yes. But I think by the end, we get some interesting stuff of her meeting that young soldier played by Robert Wagner.
Mhm.
And this is at the point where she's performing now, and she's made these accommodations where she can sort of lean on stuff to make sure she doesn't, fall. And she has this kind of charming little duet with him, and she ends up meeting him again on tour and is very gently talking to him. And he's like been so shell shocked by the war that he hasn't really spoken, and she's able to get him to speak. And everyone's like, "Oh my God, look at that!" It's like this like miracle moment,
Yeah.
and I think that scene, at least in terms of her performance, is a good one from Susan, where you see why people fell in love with her as a performer in terms of really making the other person feel good and feel appreciated. That's really just what she seems to be all about at the end of the day, is being of service to people. And in that respect, sure, I think she does a decent enough job in that. I don't think this is a bad performance. I just feel like it's not really all that impressive at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I think, it's just not an impressive movie. Like, I
Yeah,
don't know what she could have done with the script
exactly.
because the script strips this woman of all personality, really.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot else to say about this, unfortunately.
Well, it got 5 Oscar nominations. I was
It
kind of
did.
surprised. I was like,
Did
what?
surprisingly well, yes, including Thelma in supporting actress.
Yeah.
Yeah, it also won a music award over Singing in the Rain.
That is crazy.
So
That is just crazy.
that's something that happened. All right, finally we come to it. Shirley Booth, come back, Little Sheba. Another big film acting debut here, much like we've seen from the other winners that we've talked about so far in the 50s. It's a big, big performance, and it's a performance that the actress playing her had already played, of course, on stage.
Hmm.
So that's 3 years in a row of this pattern with Judy Holliday and then Vivian Leigh, who did Streetcar in London, and then Shirley Booth here. So
Mm.
it's quite a trend.
That's what they did in those days.
They
They
did.
did it on stage and then they won the Tony and then they come and do it and win the Oscar.
Exactly. So let's just talk about Shirley in terms of her theater career, because she didn't have a film career before this.
Hmm.
She was she was doing theater back to the 20s really, and eventually she was in the stage version of the Philadelphia Story with Katharine Hepburn. She originated the role in My Sister Eileen that Rosalind Russell would play in the film version. So both of
Mm.
those are connections to Best Actress for me. But yeah, she was definitely immersed in this theater world way before she entered film or television. She won a Tony Award for Goodbye My Fancy, and then she starred in this, where she won another Tony Award. And of course, when it was time to adapt it to the big screen, she was the choice to do it, even though she wasn't a mainstream star. I did read that Bette Davis was also in the mix as a
Mhm.
possibility, but she turned it down. I don't think that would have been a great choice, to be honest, so I'm glad how things worked out here. But, just like Julie Harris, I have to talk about Shirley Booth and her future career after this, because this is our only opportunity to do so. Um,
Yeah.
she is only one of 24 actors to win the Triple Crown of Acting, which
Go
is
Shirley.
the Oscar, the Emmy, and the Tony. She won 2 Emmys for Hazel, which was her sitcom in the 60s. And yeah, she only made 5 films in her career, all of them in the 50s. So in Comeback Little Sheba, she's playing Lola. She's a housewife married to an alcoholic man named Doc, played by Burt Lancaster. He's a year sober, and Lola decides to open up a room in their house to rent to a college student, and just basically to make some money. And in comes Marie, played by Terry Moore, who catches Doc's eye, and he feels kind of protective of her, especially when she brings around this guy Turk. And for Lola, we see that she's a very lonely woman who feels like her glory days are behind her, and she tends to talk a lot to whoever will listen. And we get to this point where Doc falls off the wagon and he lashes out at her, so she has to deal with that, and it's just a mess. So let's talk about our winner here. Thoughts on Shirley Booth and her winning performance in Come Back Little Sheba?
So is this where we're going to call each other daddy, or should we call each other Doc?
Ooh, yes. Maybe we'll interchange it. Yes. Daddy.
So it is like, I wanted to start there because she calls him daddy so many times, or she calls him Doc, and it is an affectation in the performance. But unlike Julie Harris, what is wonderful about this performance is that you believe her. You believe this woman would sort of cling to these tics of always trying to defer to her husband by calling him daddy, or being so into her body language, being so into her, like the whole time she's making herself smaller than him, which is, Burt Lancaster is big and tall, so, but it's still like, I always, she's always hunched down when he's around. It's a very sort of like physical affected performance, but this is the kind of affected performance that I love, because there are things that are theatrical that are definitely things that she's done in the stage performance, but they work here because they tell us the psychology of the character. It's wonderful. I love this. And also I think one of the other things that it's always so hard to play someone who is just so innately good, because the sort of on screen, there's a very thin line between good and boring. And it is only the best of actors who are able to take somebody who doesn't do much, who just wants everybody around them to be happy, and who is just innately good, and make that interesting. Of course, she's helped here by the fact that this is somebody who's really disappointed in how her life turned out, so she gets to play despair and sort of like all these other notes. But I just think it's so wonderful to see that. I'm always so impressed by somebody who can do that, and this goes from her to like somebody like Emma Thompson in Howard's End, or even like last week I saw Leslie Manville in Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris. All these women who takes these nice people who just want the best for everyone and make that interesting on screen, makes it pop, and this is what Shirley Booth does here. Despite all these tics, and we make fun of how many times she calls him daddy and all of that, this is such a wonderful performance.
Yeah, I agree. I think this performance is really remarkable. And yeah, I mean, it's continuing this streak of excellent winners in this category, going from Olivia de Havilland in The Heiress to Judy Holliday to Vivien Leigh, and now this. You have this woman that she'd only ever been on stage before this. She was virtually unknown outside of theater circles, and then winning an Oscar for Best Actress. Very cool trajectory, and winning over people like Joan Crawford and Bette Davis, people who've been in the business for decades. And when you watch this performance, I think it becomes very clear why she won. What she does in the film is just so fragile and so complicated, and she has so much to work with. It's just like what I said last week with Vivien Leigh in Streetcar. It's like an absolute gift of a part for any actress, but especially an actress who is willing to really go there and not have any vanity about trying to make the audience like her or finding the right angles or anything. She's very raw and real, and I love when performances like this and actresses like Shirley get a really juicy leading part and get recognition for it. I'd mentioned on the 1950 episode, because my guest said that this was his favorite Best Actress win of all time, that this reminded me of when people like Brenda Blethyn in Secrets and Lies, what she was giving, or like Imelda Staunton and Vera Drake. Like, these actresses who you might not see on the cover of magazines, who may look like more like everyday people, more so than movie stars, but they're just able to just knock it out of the park on an emotional level and just deliver this powerhouse kind of performance. And I think it's because she just has so much sincerity. You know, this character completely wears her heart on her sleeve.
Yeah.
And really just kind of says what's on her mind, regardless of how other people might take it. But a lot of it comes from a warm place, you know, just her trying to be a nice, courteous woman with good manners. But you also see all the insecurities here, like right on the surface, which makes it almost unnerving, a little bit uncomfortable to watch, because it feels like you're really seeing someone totally exposed, you know?
Yeah, she's so open-hearted. Like, it's such an open-hearted performance. Like, you see the wound. Like, this is somebody who's so wounded. It shows in the physicality. It shows in the deference to her husband. It shows in just everything that she, you know, every time she opens her mouth, every time, like, she moves around, like, you see this open wound that she's been living with. And then, of course, she confesses to what it is. And then you're like, you know, you want to tell her, Shirley, it's not that bad. You know, maybe give yourself a little bit of credit that, you know, you can rise above it. You're like, this is not that bad. And it's just, I just loved watching her. I've never seen her before, and wow, she's so wonderful.
And it's one of those performances where, like, from the first scene, you just get an immediate sense of who this character is. Like, you've probably encountered a person like this before, someone who talks a lot, probably talks a little too much, you know, incredibly friendly, gracious, all of that. But you also sense that there might be something else going on there underneath the surface. She doesn't always pick up on certain social cues. Like, she seems very lost in her own mind. And yeah, I mean, even in that first scene where she's showing Marie around the house, she just seems like so giddy to get the chance to even talk to someone else who isn't her husband.
Because her husband doesn't really talk to her. That's
exactly.
The thing.
Right.
He's always rebuffing her. I felt so terrible for her.
It's like, really awful. And it feels like maybe even the kind of character that you would expect to be like the supporting character to the lead. And there's a version of this where the lead is Marie, or maybe even Doc. But the choice to center the story on Lola, I think it allows us to see the humanity there. And we see, even from her just kind of tossing it off, like, that she doesn't have any children, there's a little bit of regret there. Like, this is a sore subject, but she doesn't let it show just how much she's been affected by that.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's you know, it's a reactive performance. She's always reacting to the things around her, to the people around her. It's not as easy as, you know, like you said, it would have been easier to play the drunk husband. Because, you know, a drunk, you get to be loud and you get to fall around. But here, all she does is take care of him, which is like, but in how she takes care of him, how she does that physically, what she, you know, the way she delivers the lines, why she's trying to do that, where she conveys her concern and her love. And also sometimes just the fact that, you know, she wants to tell him, maybe please be nice to me. But she can't say that. She can't say it. So then she has to act that.
Yeah. I think the greatness in her performance also is just in the way that the film is staged too, is that we understand there's more to her than what other people see. And it's that sort of peppy energy that she brings to it that makes it almost more heartbreaking when we realize that this is a woman who is desperately lonely and she's living in the past. And that's, of course, symbolized with her calling out for her dog, Sheba, which, Sheba ran away and never came back. And that whole, even if plot-wise, it's about all these different things, like Doc and his alcoholism and his weird feelings about Marie and, like, what's going to happen there. I think it's mostly the film is about how does this woman actually come to grips with her past and be able to move on and try to find some level of happiness, even if it's not a great situation.
Yeah. I mean, both she and Doc are stuck in the past. He's stuck. They're stuck in that incident that brought them together. And they feel trapped by the marriage, by what happened to them. And, you know, they act out But he can act out by being an alcoholic or by developing these strange feelings of protectiveness around Marie. But she can't really do more than just try to make everybody feel nice, or make things nice for everybody around her. And so she does these monologues, and she's always like, let's put on some peppy music and let's dance, and everybody kind of looks at her like, she's this silly woman, and she's not. She's just hurt. And there's such a fine line to play that silliness that somebody who is interacting with her would see, but also give us the depth behind that. Why is she acting this way? And how she's not really that silly. She's just so hurt.
Right.
Yeah, she's wonderful. I just keep saying she's wonderful because she is.
It's hard not to. Yeah. And what I love how is it's like, even in the middle of this rather harrowing domestic drama, that she gets these moments of real levity and joy, like how much she loves music. She loves, like, peppy music more than any kind of music, because she can dance to it. She's dancing up the stairs at one point. She's like wiggling around on the couch while she's listening to music. And there's, she's obviously doing the Charleston for Doc and sort of kicking her legs up. And she just has this joy that is so charming, just because of how earnest she is, and how this sort of feels like her getting to really express herself in a positive way without having to think about anything or sort of be haunted by the past. And she just totally goes for it. She isn't shy at all in her body language. She's just like performing like she's some young dancer that's like half her age. And yeah, it's just not something you see every day in a film in 1952 or now, so.
Yeah. What a great performance. What a great film. So are we going to talk about why they're stuck together? Are we going to give it away?
I mean, it's a 60-year-old, 70-year-old film, so we can certainly discuss it. Where do you want to start?
Let's just start there. Let's start, by why they got married and why they feel stuck in this marriage that drove him to alcoholism and drove her to sort of have such an open wound for, like, I don't know how many years.
Yeah, feels like 20 or something like that. But yeah, they got pregnant, right? And so
when they were teenagers and they were still dating in high school.
Right. And her parents were just very disturbed by this, especially her father, and kicked her out of the house, essentially. So they got married, and they lost the kid, and now they have just this kind of trauma, and they're stuck, and they're older now, and she can't have kids. And so it's just...
And he was going to go to medical school, and he didn't, because he had to get married and take care of her, so he became a chiropractor. So there's just disappointment all around.
Right.
They're childless. Their dreams were sort of cut at the legs so early on, and they couldn't fulfill any of what they hoped for because of what happened.
Yeah, and the tough part of it, this is, jumping to the end, but when she's gone through this whole situation with Doc and her not feeling safe and wanting to come home and be with her parents, her father still is holding on to these things. He's held on to this resentment all these years later and doesn't even let her come back to the house to protect herself from her abusive husband. And that phone call scene is so unbelievably painful to watch play out.
Yep. Like she's crying for help. She's asking them to help her. And she's talking to her mother, and her mother can only just say, no, you can't come because your dad still feels the same way. Even all these years she's the thing is, she married the guy, so why do you feel that? Anyway, it's just so heartbreaking. Yeah. And we also sort of get the feeling that she's really depressed because there's all these things about how she sleeps till noon and she doesn't clean the house. Like, she has this neighbor who's maybe German, Russian, something like that, who makes fun of her a little bit about how, she doesn't keep the house well. Yeah. And even Doc says things to her like that. So she's also neglecting, quote unquote, her work because she's depressed and she sleeps till noon and she can't bring herself to do the things that people tell her she should do.
You have these moments where she's really sort of spiraling into this darker place and talking about little Sheba and how her fur was so white and fluffy, and she hates that Sheba got old. And it's this reflection of how she got old, and now she even says that she's old and fat and sloppy.
Mm-hmm.
And the scene where she's really asking him if he regrets marrying her, I go back to the idea that, like, what would Bette Davis have done in this role? For as much as we love her, I think she would have played that with a little more bitterness. And that's not what Shirley Booth does. Like, she's very sweet and innocent, and you can tell that she's not reveling in any of this. She's not getting any sort of satisfaction out of grilling her husband. Like, she's coming from a very insecure place. And I think, like you're saying, it's just this place of depression, and it's something that she hides with how cheery she can be. But then you get those moments of quiet, and they really just sort of reveal everything.
And this character, I think it's sort of different. Like, I kept thinking while I was watching this of The Glass Menagerie and Amanda Wingfield, who's somebody else who's like, in middle age, and who sort of like, her marriage didn't work and she has all these disappointments in her life. But to your point, like, Amanda's bitter and she's hard on the people around her. And this is so not like what Shirley Booth does here, or what is even written for this character, because her modus operandi is that she just wants to take care of everyone. She just wants to push the thoughts away, and her way of pushing the thoughts away is to just try to make things nice or sleep till the afternoon. It's such a different way of dealing with this character who we've seen in other the middle-aged person disappointed in what their life took them so far.
And the last 30 minutes or so, I think, are just sublime work all around, like really deepening this character even more, and also proving that even though she's sweet and she's earnest, she's not simple. And she's also not so far gone that she doesn't recognize reality. Like, we get to this point where Doc has stolen this bottle of whiskey. He relapsed, and she's just in a panic, and she's calling his AA buddies, and she knows the right thing to do, which is to get him taken care of. And
exactly. There's not a moment's doubt that he's drunk somewhere. Like, it's not like, I wonder what he's up to. No, she knows he's drunk somewhere. It has happened before. She knows exactly what she needs to do, and she sort of like springs into action, but also in this sort of like very desperate, very sad way.
Yeah, and it's hard to watch the scene of him after he comes home and he's calling her a slut and, almost choking her out. It's really painful, but I find it just really engrossing because you're in it with these characters and you're on her side completely, and she's just doing what's best for her and also what's best for him. And that moment also where they're at the hospital, and she seems so moved when she hears that, like, he's been calling out her name, and the close-up we get of her is phenomenal work from her.
Yeah.
Heartbreaking stuff, and it leaves you in a really weird mixed emotional place where you sense that she's gonna be okay, like she's stopped having these dreams about Sheba, but also she's still in this situation with this guy who's not great.
Yeah.
So it's like, where do they go from here? I don't know, but
they're just stuck. Like, that's what's sad about it. Like, this is how what I got is that they're just gonna be stuck together forever, and nothing's gonna change. Unfortunately, he'll get better, and then he'll relapse again.
I mean, it's an incredible performance. I really feel like this needs to be watched by. It feels like one of these performances that's like a hidden gem. That for people who have seen it, it's like, wow, this is one of the best actress wins ever, possibly.
Absolutely, and it's because her profile is not, it's not an auteur movie. It's not like, and she hasn't sort of like, she doesn't, have a longer career in movies or appeared in any other movies that people might care about, or, or she had a tabloid life or whatever.
Right.
The other things that sort of make you famous and keep you in the cultural conscious.
But let's talk about her winning this. Rave reviews all around for this performance. I read that she was really compared to even some styles of European films just in her acting style. And
she won Best Actress at Cannes.
She did. And she won New York Film Critics. She won National Board of Review. She won the Golden Globe. Like, there was no question that Shirley Booth was winning this Oscar. So ultimately, I don't think this is one of those races that is particularly juicy in terms of like, oh, who's going to win it? Like, it was always going to be Shirley, I think.
Yeah.
But I read Shirley was very humble in her winning. She said, this is a quote from her. She said, "There is all the difference in the world between playing a character more than 1,000 times, as I did, and getting your lines on set in the morning and having to face the camera with them in the afternoon."
Wow. Yeah. She's humble even in winning. It fits her work.
It does. If anything, I mean, what we just talked about with Julie Harris too, like one was able to really adapt her performance to film and do a total knockout, and the other wasn't as much.
Yeah.
Arguably.
Yeah. She was so believable. Like, I felt like I was in this house with her. I'm not only in her house. Like, yes, she felt like this is a place that she was in. She might have not been comfortable in it, but it's a place that she knew. And that's just because of what she was doing, because of the performance.
Yeah. It's so intimate. Yeah. So we got a whole bunch of Twitter questions. I probably won't do all of them, but we can do a handful here.
Okay, let's do it. I'm excited.
Yes. Christoph N. said, "Is this the overall most forgotten lineup you have encountered so far, and does it deserve to be?"
Okay, this is shade.
This is shade.
But I think I'll just repeat what I said at the beginning, because when you said 1952, and that's all you said when we first started talking, I was like, oh, the Joan and Bette year, the only time they were nominated together. So it's not unmemorable. It's very memorable because of the fact that those two are in it. But I think if you watch Come Back Little Sheba, because of Shirley Booth's work, like, it's amazing. So that's two reasons why it's very memorable, Christoph.
If we're talking overall forgotten by the culture mainstream, I don't know. It's maybe not on the level of obviously 1950 by any means. But, you know, there's no Best Picture nominees in this lineup, so maybe these are films that haven't been as seen as much. Two of them aren't even accessible on streaming, so yeah, I think for a few reasons it might be on the slightly more forgotten side, but nothing to do with some of these performances themselves. And as you're saying, anything with Joan and Bette in it is not going to be forgotten, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, like, the years that people like to talk about over and over again is when there was a competition between several performances, or between two. That's what people love, where there's two. It could have gone either way, and it went one way and everybody hates it or likes it. And so that's what we keep talking about all the time. And this has clearly had a front runner and an undisputed worthy winner.
Exactly.
So that's another reason why, maybe.
Yeah. In terms of, like Christoph was saying, that I've encountered so far, I would argue that the Helen Hayes year is not very memorable.
What year was that?
32.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, one of those with only 3 nominees and films that aren't really discussed all that much. So I would say probably that year over that one. But Andrew Carden said, "Why is Shirley Booth the all-time greatest Best Actress winner?" Love a loaded question. Thank you, Andrew.
I think because of all the things we just talked about.
Yeah. So. As previously mentioned is the answer to that. But I don't think she's the all-time greatest. But at the same time, if you were to say that she was, I would not put up any argument.
Yeah, totally. So I'll admit something on this podcast that I don't admit. I kind of don't like lists, and I don't make them. Like, it's so hard to me at the end of the year to do like a top 10 or whatever, or vote in my critics group and all of that stuff. because I don't like making lists. I usually just love what I love and I don't want to compare them. So I don't know. Right now, because it's the one that I last saw, if I might say it's the greatest, but tomorrow I'll say something else.
There you go.
I actually did give you two other names earlier today, so look at me lying. But anyway.
Love to lie on the podcast. Yeah. I think it's like we were saying, she's so in the pocket from the very first scene, and there's just also very little association that you have as a viewer with her as a performer, which makes her really feel like this character, unlike most Best Actress wins, to be honest. So, yeah. Got Geo Wild said, in Oscar circles, Shirley Booth's performance seems to be pretty well acclaimed. Why do you think she's been underrated in pop culture? We've sort of been discussing that. I think she only made 5 films. That's for one thing. Mm-hmm. She did mostly theater work, so that's naturally what's going to happen. And she isn't like the glamorous type that sometimes people like to fetishize.
Yeah,
I'll say that.
Also, like when I was looking at Daniel Mann, who directed Come Back Little Sheba, what is Tell's Best Actress director? He directed this. He directed Elizabeth Taylor in Butterfly 8, Susan Hayward in I'll Cry Tomorrow. He directed The Rose Tattoo. Like, he's directed some Best Actresses, Oscar Best Actresses.
Yeah.
And nobody talks about him either.
No, not at
So
all.
that's the other reason it's not an auteur film.
Yeah. Gabe Guarin said, who else could you see in Shirley Booth's role? He said, my mind went to Thelma Ritter.
I don't know. Like, I was so taken with her that I don't know. I saw Essa Passer-Murkison on stage, and she was wonderful. So I would have liked that performance to be captured on film. So I'll keep that my answer. Yeah. Or maybe someone of, contemporary that I really love is Octavia Spencer. I love her. I love when she plays good, like these wonderfully good people who just want to make people around them better. I think that's like her strength. Like, it's where she shines.
It's a good call. I have a suggestion. I know that she happened to actually die in 1952, if we're talking about who could have played her in like this particular production. I would say Hattie McDaniel could do it.
Yeah, totally. Yes.
Yeah, I think that would have been really interesting. Or, hey, Ethel Waters, she's right there.
Yeah. She's right there in her prime making movies. Yeah.
Owen Daly, why do you think Shirley is one of 3 actresses to win in her 50s?
Who are the 3? Because I know it's Shirley and Julianne Moore. Who's the 3rd?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Because I went and looked. Frances McDormand had just turned 60 when she won for 3 Billboards, or maybe she was 59, or it was the year she was going to turn 60. I don't know, but just looking at 57 and 17, that makes it 60.
I don't know.
Well, I think Hollywood loves an ingenue, and usually actresses win when they're younger, in their 30s and 20s, and then Hollywood kind of forgets them for the most part, especially in their 50s, and then they fall in love with them again once they are quote unquote ready to play the Dowager Countess type of roles, which is, Meryl won again in her 60s, and Katharine Hepburn won again in her 60s, and that kind of thing. So I guess that's the answer. Although there are more actresses winning in their 40s, because I think that's more of a recent thing. So that's maybe why we have more in their 40s and not enough in their 50s.
This is from Chelsea. Our friend Chelsea, actually.
Hi, Chelsea.
How does this Joan role stack up against her other hot girl nominations? And are there any other films you'd nominate her for? And as she says, my vote is Johnny Guitar. Hot.
Oh, very hot. Yes. Johnny Guitar also starring Sterling Hayden, who plays Johnny Guitar, who is in The Star with Bette Davis. So another Betty Joan connection.
Yes.
Well, Mildred Pierce is tops,
of course.
I think it's 1, 2, 3. Mildred Pierce, Possessed, then Sudden Fear for me. I would nominate her for Humoresque, which is a wonderful movie. And if we are talking here about from 1946, if we're talking here about all the close-ups that she gets, and all the glamour, that's another sort of glamorous role where she gets a lot of close-ups, and she has the glasses and she takes them off, and then she gets that wonderful scene at the end of Humoresque where she's just a woman on the beach, and she's walking in her beautiful, gorgeous gown, and she looks so wonderful, and it's so long, another sort of like those Joan long scenes where she's just walking on the beach and then, the weight of the world and the story has ended and you're just watching Joan. So yeah, I would have nominated her for Humoresque.
Yeah, I would also throw in for an early silent role for her, Our Dancing Daughters, I think is her at her flapper best. So that's a really fun one from Joan. Cody Derricks said, is this your least favorite Betty nomination? If not, what is?
Shady Cody. But hi,
Shady Cody.
I think we kind of answered that. And it probably is, not because Betty is not good or is not worthy, or just because she had so many wonderful films and performances and she was nominated for them. So this kind of just by elimination, and if you want to make a list, it's probably towards the bottom, yes.
Yeah, I would say my least favorite is actually Dangerous, because I feel like that's a performance she could have done in her sleep, and something like that is a little more boring compared to something over the top in the case of The Star, which is at least more fun to watch for me. Let's see. Fritz said, who would you cast today in a remake of The Star? And who would you cast today in a remake of Sudden Fear?
Ooh. I mean, I was thinking that maybe I would cast somebody who would make it funny, The Star, who would make The Star funny and play into the comedy. So, and I don't know, Lisa Kudrow, Regina Hall, maybe somebody like that. Somebody who can really make it comedic.
I know exactly who should be in a remake of The Star. Reese Witherspoon. But I do like your suggestion too. I feel like Lisa Kudrow would be very comeback feeling in that type of role.
Yeah.
And for Sudden Fear, I'd like to see what maybe like Amy Adams could do with that. I don't know.
Yeah. Somebody who has big eyes. Who would that?
Yes.
Emma Stone. Or
someone who played in a film called Big Eyes.
Yes, exactly.
Anyway, both Gordon and Owen Daly want us to talk about whether we think it would be interesting to have Joan in The Star and Betty in Sudden Fear, and how would that play out? How do you think they would be?
I mean, Joan would never play The Star. Like, she just wouldn't do it, right?
No,
so
probably not.
So I don't know that it would be interesting to see Joan sort of play such a shady take on what she's good at and what she's famous for. So I'll pass on that. I don't want to see that, frankly. But I think Betty could be interesting in Sudden Fear.
Sure, she could definitely play like a plotting revenge very easily.
Yeah. What is is it something called The Forest? I think that was, I can't remember. I'm losing all my, I think I'm another Best Actress winner, Julianne Moore in Still Alice. I'm just like, sometimes I forget the titles. Something at The Forest where she's also kind of, it's sort of like, it's Bette Davis movie. I think it's in the mid-50s and she's...
Is this The Petrified Forest?
Yes. She's kind of disillusioned with the man in her life, and It's not exactly this. Like, I don't think he was trying to kill her there, but it's sort of a thriller and noirish thing. So she's done that, but I think she would be interesting in Sudden Fear, maybe.
Sure.
But the thing with Betty is that, again, she doesn't do glamour that much, or she does like transformation into glamour. Like, she's not the first person I would think of to play a haughty, rich heiress / playwright.
Exactly.
She plays more earthy types. So I think they got cast well in the roles that fit them.
Yes. I would like to see Barbara Stanwyck do Sudden Fear. How about that?
Totally. Barbara would knock it. Yeah, should be great.
Miles McHale said, Susan Hayward, always love to see her, but are her movies the most formulaic of the female-driven pictures that she headlined? I think most of her nominations are in pretty middling movies that just serve as showcases for her as an actress, which is fine, but they're not always the most engaging. So maybe,
And this is also just this one. I mean, this one is just like maybe the worst of the bunch that she has done in the 50s.
Back to Christoph, he said, Julie Harris in The Member of the Wedding. Why?
Well, Christoph,
A fair
just go listen
question.
back to what we said.
See previous thoughts.
But also, it's just because she did it on stage, she was acclaimed for it. That's why.
Yeah, that's why. Miles McHale said, two of our ladies are again reprising star-making roles from Broadway. Can we bring this trend back?
Yeah,
I would like
let's
to
get
see it.
Nina Ariada in Venus in Fur. Although they did do a French version of Venus in Fur, but I would love to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do. I'm looking at the Tony winners for Best Actress right now. Elaine May in an adaptation of The Waverly Gallery. Let's do that. Bring back Glenda Jackson for Three Tall Women. How about our fave Ruth Negga doing her own version of Lady Macbeth on film?
Yes, that would be amazing. The unfortunate thing is that if they do Three Tall Women, it will probably be Meryl again, like she did Doubt and Mamma Mia and all the other things.
Yeah.
Into the Woods. Like it seems that when it's a musical or a stage adaptation, they go to Meryl.
Always Meryl number one. Yeah.
Or August Osage County, but yeah.
Maybe Meryl can sit this one out and we'll bring in Glenn. How about that?
Let's do that. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. We'll close out here with César Award winner Baby Annette.
Hi, Baby Annette.
We love, she is a baby after all.
She is.
How close do you think Lana Turner was to a nomination for The Bad and the Beautiful, and why do you think she missed? Another good question, considering The Bad and the Beautiful won 5 Oscars.
Yeah.
Still wild to me that it wasn't nominated for Best Picture. It won an acting award, it won screenplay, and it won 3 tech awards. That just doesn't compute. But for Lana, yeah, I'm not sure if she was really taken seriously enough. Mm-hmm. Especially when you look at the makeup of this field, it feels like they really, they sort of valued the more powerhouse types of performers. I don't know if they thought of Lana in that particular light.
Yeah, sometimes they have blind spots of people who just they think of. Like I think Joan for a long time was just sort of as a glamorous girl until she broke with Ms. Mildred Pierce. And then once you're in the club, you're in the club. I think this is why we didn't get Jennifer Lopez for Hustlers. So it's still something they still do, even until a couple of years ago, at least. And Lana Turner was always one of the most glamorous of stars. And I also just think in The Bad and the Beautiful, I wouldn't say she was outshined, but she was maybe not the most memorable. And not because of her performance, but just because of the part itself.
Yeah, I haven't seen it in a little while, and I do struggle to remember whether she was nomination worthy. But yeah, she eventually got one with Peyton Place, so it's all good there. But shall we move on to our final section?
Yeah, let's do it. Well, thank you for everyone who sent us questions.
Yes, really, really good questions. And so let's talk about it. Who do we think was the runner-up to Miss Shirley Booth? Could be any of them, really.
Yes, except Julie Harris, I don't think.
Well,
maybe I'm biased.
I don't know.
I think if you look at sort of like how the movies did at the Oscars, which is a way to do it, right? Even though it got 5 nominations, I really can't see Susan Hayward with this performance being close to winning or the runner-up. So I would then just go to Sudden Fear, which I think received 3 nominations, and I would say Joan was the runner-up.
Interesting. Yeah, I could definitely see that. I do think I am trending a little more to Susan Hayward, despite not feeling like the performance is quite worthy. I think for a few reasons. Obviously, the film did get 5 nominations. It did win an Oscar. Also, I didn't mention this before, but she won the Golden Globe for comedy or musical, so she at least had something, unlike anyone else here. But I think, she's playing a real person. She's on a track at this point with this is her 3rd nomination. She still hasn't won yet. So I think probably Shirley Booth just won the lion's share of votes in the end, and that everyone else was barely able to really contend. But if I were to guess just cynically, I would say Susan Hayward. But I think the showiness of what Joan Crawford does would make her probably competitive as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would agree it's between those two. Maybe I don't know what the temperature was on Julie Harris at the time, but I was also reading that she even criticized her own performance.
She did? What did she say?
She said like every time they did a close up, it was like a nightmare.
Oh.
Just watching herself on the screen.
Well,
So
it was a nightmare for us too, Julie.
well, come on now. It's not that bad. Maybe. I don't know.
Just joking.
Yes, of course. But let's give our verdict on who we think should have won. Do you think, Murtada, that Shirley Booth correctly won, or do you think it should have been one of these others?
No, Shirley should have won for sure. Yeah, she deserved it. It's wonderful. It's the best performance.
Yeah.
Among these five. Do you agree?
Yes, I think Shirley Booth far and away would get my vote here. All due respect to Joan Crawford, who would probably be my runner-up.
Yes.
I think she just has everything that I look for in a Best Actress win. And I think it's just, the whole journey from her being an unknown to then this Best Actress winner is such a juicy narrative that if I was a voter in 1952, I would be all on board the Shirley train. So
yeah, agreed.
Yes.
My runner-up, though, would be Bette Davis, because I think Betty should have won 2 years ago for All About Eve. I love Judy Holliday, but you stole Betty's Oscar. And Betty should have been the first actress to win three Oscars. So for sure, my runner-up is Betty. And I would give her 4 because she should win in 1962 too.
Wow. Yes. Well, more on that later down the line. But yeah, thank you, Murtada. I really appreciate you doing this. This was a whole lot of fun.
Yes, I had so much fun. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Yes.
I love always to come on your podcast and talk to you about all these wonderful performances.
Yes. Like I said, I love to talk actresses with you. I think you're one of the best to do it.
Oh, so nice. Thank you.
Well, tell the people where they could find more of you on the internet.
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at me_says, where you can find my work. If you're a queer filmmaker, send your movie to newfest.org. We're in the throes of preparing for the 2022 festival, which will be this October. But you can find my writing and everything else on Twitter, me_says.
Yes. And if you want to listen to Murtada talk about Cate Blanchett extensively, he did a wonderful podcast, Sundays with Kate.
Yes, that's at sundayswithkate.com. And yes, I've talked about most of Cate Blanchett's movies. And Kevin was my guest at least a couple of times.
Yes. We talked about Truth and we talked about Bandits.
Yes.
So thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show's at Oscar Runner-Up on Twitter, Instagram at And the Runner-Up Is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like what you heard and want to hear more, patreon.com/andtherunnerup_is. So in a few weeks, the first week in September, we'll be talking about the 1953 Best Actress race. The nominees there were Leslie Caron for Lily, Ava Gardner for Mogambo, Audrey Hepburn for Roman Holiday, Deborah Kerr for From Here to Eternity, and Maggie McNamara for The Moon is Blue, with the winner being Miss Audrey Hepburn. So that's what to watch before the next episode. Thank you so much again, Murtada.
Thank you, Kevin. It was such a wonderful conversation. I love talking with you.
And with that, I will bid you all adieu.